Hi, this is Glenda from Beautiful Soaps by Glenda. And today's soap, it's a soap that I made in collaboration with Renee from Soaps for Love. The parameters of the collaboration were to use lavender as part of the fragrance blend, and I will be combining it with honey, orange pepper, Indian sandalwood, and vanilla. Usually, when I blend these fragrances, it causes acceleration, which is what I want for this soap because the second part of the collaboration is to use scrapers. And lastly, we both need to use yellow and purple as the colors of our soap. I'm going to include a link to Renee's channel and also to her video below so you can check out what she did with this collaboration. After blending all the fragrances, I was ready to start with the soap. This is the recipe that I will be using, and I'm going to include a link in the description box below. It mostly has beef tallow, coconut oil, olive oil, shea butter, and castor oil. These are the scrapers that we will be using, and as you have noticed, I cut off the sides of mine on the top because after watching her video, it appears that this prevented the scrapers from scraping properly. Now she solved this problem by doing a bouncing motion throughout the length of the mold to get her shape done. My oils were at 119 Fahrenheit or 48 Celsius, and the light water solution was at 97 Fahrenheit or 36 degrees Celsius. I'm going to start by adding the light water solution to the oils, and this is the dual light solution, which means I have 95% of sodium hydroxide and 5% of potassium hydroxide, and this is supposed to help with bubbles. I then start blending it until I reach emulsion phase. I wanted to keep it at an emulsion phase because I know that the fragrance blend tends to accelerate the soap batter. So I thought that would be a good way to keep part of the soap fluid or somewhat fluid while the first layer is set up. And my plan is to add the fragrance individually to each container that is going to form a layer of the soap. First, I divided the soap batter in half to color one half purple and the other one yellow. I'm going to just stir them with a spatula to distribute the colors because I don't want to use the stick blender since I don't want to blend these two trays just yet. And because I will be using a yellow mica, I'm going to try to avoid getting this into gel phase. It seems that yellow and orange micas don't do well when they go through gel phase. They seem to fade a bit, and I wanted to keep this yellow vibrant. This is the first time I'm using this particular mica, so I'm curious to see how it does in soap. I'm going to include a link to all the products that I use below as well in case you're curious. I am now dividing the purple section into two, so this will be a quarter of the soap total batter, and I'm going to add the fragrance to this portion and pour it into the mold. This fragrance blend tends to discolor the soap to a light brown. However, I used some vanilla stabilizer that I hope will help prevent that. Before adding the soap to the mold, I remembered that I wanted to mark the height of the first scraper. Doing that helped me realize that my first layer was not as high as I wanted it to be, so I added some more of the purple soap batter, mixed it with some fragrance, and put it into the mold. At this stage, the soap still appeared to be in emulsion phase, which I thought it was fine because usually this fragrance blend accelerates and in a couple minutes it has set up. So I decided to start timing how long I needed to wait. At the point that I finished pouring, it was 12:23. And that is 5 minutes later, I came back to check, and to my surprise, even though the edges seemed to be setting up, the center of the soap was still very fluid, and I wasn't quite sure why. As I waited, I realized that when I usually do this blend, instead of lavender, I use rose fragrance oil, which explains why 20 minutes later my soap batter was still a little bit fluid. It was getting thick, but not thick enough to be scrape. This also became increasingly frustrating because it seemed that even though it was scraping, the soap didn't have the consistency enough to stay in the shape that it needed to be. However, if I lift up the scraper and I only did the top surface, it seemed to work better, but it didn't stay there. 15 minutes later, I decided to try again. At this point, I'm running out of patience. To begin with, sculpted layers is not one of my favorite techniques. It's probably one of my least favorite techniques. And this is probably why, because I don't have the patience to wait around for soap to set. And I'm attempting to just scrape the top of the surface, maybe like a 1/4 inch of the top, and then gradually dip the scraper a little bit further down. Initially, this was working. However, the deeper that I put the scraper down, then the shapes seem to collapse. It seems to me that the scraper creates too thin of a shape for they to have enough strength to stand on their own. So I think in the future I will revisit this design and perhaps create thicker stripes if needed. In a video that I watched recently, or maybe it was something I read, I'm not sure, I remember learning that the prefrontal cortex of the brain is in charge, among other things, of our problem solving and decision making tasks. And when we go to sleep, this part of the brain becomes somewhat inactive. So when you start getting sleepy, supposedly this part of the brain also starts sort of shutting down a little bit. So we tend to make poor choices when we are in a sleepy state. And that is the only way I can explain why I did what I did next. So I added a few drops of a fragrance called Allure that I have tried in soap before, and it tends to fade, like it pretty much disappears in soap, and it causes crazy acceleration. So I thought by adding a few drops of it and mixing it with the soap that's already in the mold, I could cause it to start setting up faster so that I can do the scraping for the other layers and pretty much be done with this soap. And since scraping a thin layer seemed to be what was working, I decided just to do multiple layers of the purple and the yellow together and just scrape a little bit at a time. However, when I did the scraping and I added the yellow, by that time the yellow portion of the soap had thickened up considerably and it wasn't filling in the ridges really well. So my guess is that I'm going to have a lot of air pockets in this soap. And instead of stripes, I think I'm going to have a random pattern. It may look more like a confetti soap. At this point, I'm not sure because I have not cut the soap yet. So we'll see. Meanwhile, I repeated the process and I alternated the layers of the yellow and the purple, doing a little bit of scraping at a time. And then once I was done filling up the mold, I just did some lightly texturing, sprayed some gold Enviro glitter on top, and then added some embeds that I had. So it's the next day. I remove it from the mold. You can tell there's a lot of gaps. This side doesn't have as many gaps. I don't like how the colors look. The purple looks, it just looks mottled. The yellow here looks pale. Some of it looks strong, but the purple looks more like lavender. I don't know. I'm not crazy about this, but I'm very curious to see what it looks like. Here we go. Well, that's interesting. This is an interesting result. It smells weird. I don't like the smell of it. It smells like a perm. It seems that when I cut it, the process of saponification was not complete because the following day the colors had evened out and the chemical smell had gone mostly, and then the lavender could be smelled. I'll post a picture next of how they look like, and make sure to go visit Renee to see her video. Thank you. Bye.